What if I told you that mega churches have been systematically stealing from God's people, and Jesus himself showed me proof during my near-death experience? I never believed in near-death experiences either. They were just inventions, hallucinations from dying brains. But what happened to me was undeniably real and changed everything I thought I knew about divine justice. For 15 years as a CPA auditing mega churches, I thought I'd seen it all until Jesus revealed the shocking truth they don't want you to know. I'll share the details of my 8-minute near-death experience, Jesus' shocking revelations about church corruption, and how this divine encounter transformed me from skeptical accountant to spiritual whistleblower. What I discovered aligns perfectly with the divine justice we're witnessing right now. This summer has been called the summer of pastor scandals, and it's no coincidence. For over 30 years, the Trinity Foundation has been documenting the financial abuses happening behind closed doors in mega churches across the country. Gateway Church alone has lost over 17% of its membership as the truth comes to light. But what I'm about to share with you goes deeper than any investigation could ever reach. Let me take you back to my world as a mega church accountant. For years, I worked within the financial departments of some of the most prominent religious organizations in the country. Every day, I saw the numbers that told a story most congregants never knew existed. Private jets worth millions, while families in the congregation struggled to pay rent. Pastors living in tax-free mansions that cost more than entire neighborhoods, while their followers were told that their faithfulness would be measured by their tithing. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. I would sit in services listening to sermons about Jesus living a simple life, about how the love of money is the root of all evil, while knowing exactly how much that pastor had spent on luxury cars that same week. The disconnect between the message and the reality kept me awake at night. As I looked deeper into the finances, following money trails that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify, I began to understand that this wasn't just poor stewardship. This was a system. A carefully constructed web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and creative tax structures that would make Wall Street executives jealous. Over 50,000 congregants were being affected by financial decisions they knew nothing about, decisions that prioritized the comfort of a few over the mission they thought they were supporting. But what I discovered next would make those sleepless nights seem like child's play. I remember one specific Tuesday morning, sitting in that sterile conference room with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, holding an invoice for a $50,000 watch purchase marked as ministry equipment. The smell of expensive leather from the pastor's briefcase filled the room, while I calculated that this single watch cost more than 3 families in our congregation made in an entire year. My hands actually trembled as I processed what I was seeing. But nothing could have prepared me for what Jesus himself would reveal to me about this corruption. But before I could fully process the implications of what I'd uncovered, my body began paying the price for months of sleepless nights and growing anxiety. You see, carrying this burden of knowledge, the weight of these discoveries was taking its toll on me physically and emotionally. Working late nights, losing sleep over what I'd uncovered, my body was sending warning signals I chose to ignore. Then one night, everything came to a head when I experienced a cardiac event while working late, trying to unravel a particularly complex set of financial transactions. I remember the chest pain hitting like a freight train. I managed to call for help before collapsing at my desk, surrounded by financial documents that told a story of greed disguised as godliness. What happened next challenged everything I thought I knew about the boundaries between life and death, between the physical and spiritual realms. As consciousness slipped away in that sterile office surrounded by evidence of corruption, something extraordinary began to happen. Instead of darkness, I found myself moving through what I can only describe as a tunnel of pure light. The sensation was unlike anything I had ever experienced, not just visual, but like being wrapped in the embrace of pure love itself. At first, I was afraid, wondering if this was death. But then, an overwhelming peace replaced my fear, and I knew I was moving towards something sacred. It wasn't just visual, it was a complete immersion in something beyond physical reality. The light wasn't harsh or blinding, but rather enveloping and peaceful, like being wrapped in unconditional love itself. As I moved through this space, I became aware of a presence. Not just any presence, but one that I immediately recognized as Jesus. Not the sanitized, comfortable Jesus of stained glass windows, but a figure radiating both infinite love and absolute truth. His presence was overwhelming, not in a frightening way, but in the way that complete honesty always is when you've been living with partial truths. I could feel warmth radiating from him that seemed to penetrate every cell of my body, and when he looked at me, it was as if he was seeing not just my present moment, but every choice I had ever made, every doubt I had carried, every time I had chosen silence over truth. The first thing he communicated to me wasn't through words, but through direct understanding. He showed me that he had been watching, that he knew exactly what was happening in these institutions that claimed him. The pain in his presence was palpable as he revealed the depth of betrayal happening in his name. But this was just the beginning. What he showed me next would expose the most shocking financial scheme I'd ever seen. "Michael," I heard him say, though the communication was deeper than sound, "you have seen the truth that my people need to know. The temples have become dens of thieves again, just as they were in my time on earth. But this time, I am calling my true followers to expose the corruption from within. What Jesus showed me next will stay with me for the rest of my life." He revealed the spiritual reality behind what I had been seeing in the financial records. Those private jets weren't just expensive transportation. They were symbols of how far these leaders had strayed from the humble message they were supposed to represent. The tax-free mansions weren't just legal loopholes. They were monuments to greed, built on the sacrifices of faithful people who trusted their leaders to use their donations wisely. But the revelation that shook me most was about the tithing trap. Jesus showed me how these leaders had twisted the concept of giving into a transactional system that contradicted everything he taught about unconditional love. They had convinced people that their relationship with God depended on their financial contributions, that blessing and favor could be purchased through percentages and offerings. I watched as Jesus showed me a specific family, Maria, a single mother who worked 2 jobs but still tithed faithfully every week, believing God would bless her sacrifice. At the same time, her pastor was using her donations to pay for his son's private school tuition. The betrayal in Jesus' presence was so intense, I could feel it burning through my entire being. "My love is free," Jesus communicated to me with an intensity that filled every part of my being. "It cannot be bought, earned, or withheld based on what anyone gives. These leaders have turned my gift into a business transaction, and my people are suffering because of it." As I began to understand the magnitude of what I was being shown, Jesus revealed the hidden accounting schemes that I had only begun to uncover in my earthly investigation. As Jesus showed me this money trail, I felt sick to my stomach. Here was Maria's weekly tithe of $50, money she scraped together from her grocery budget, being shuffled through shell companies like a shell game. I watched her pastor's wife approve a $2,000 spa day, while Maria was deciding between medicine and groceries for her kids. Let me show you exactly how this works, with one real example Jesus revealed to me. Picture a $2 million donation meant for feeding the homeless. Watch how it moves. First, it goes to Administrative Services LLC, that's the pastor's wife's company. Then to Ministry Consulting Group, his brother's firm. Finally, it lands in Pastoral Housing Foundation, which owns the pastor's $800,000 lakefront home. By the time it's done moving, only $200,000 actually reaches the homeless shelter. Here's where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. Watch how they steal right in front of everyone's eyes. He showed me board meetings where lavish spending was justified as ministry expenses. Luxury homes were purchased as pastoral housing. Family members were put on payrolls for jobs they never performed. It was a system designed to extract maximum benefit for a few while maintaining the appearance of religious integrity. The most heartbreaking part of the revelation was seeing how this corruption affected the spiritual lives of genuine believers. People who desperately needed hope were being taught that their struggles were evidence of insufficient faith or inadequate giving. Families were going into debt to meet tithing expectations, while their spiritual leaders lived in unprecedented luxury. "This is why I am calling you back," Jesus told me. "Not everyone who claims to speak for me actually represents my heart. My people need to learn to discern between authentic spiritual leadership and those who use my name for personal gain." With those words burning in my heart, and a mission I never asked for but couldn't refuse, I felt myself being drawn back toward my physical body. When I returned to my physical body, I wondered if anyone would believe what I had experienced, but I didn't have to wait long for confirmation that this wasn't just a hallucination or medical side effect. I thought this experience might just be a hallucination until I watched everything Jesus warned me about come true in real time. Since my return, I've watched in absolute amazement as everything Jesus warned me about has come true. Gateway Church, with its 100,000 members, has seen thousands leave as financial improprieties come to light. Hillsong's empire has crumbled under the weight of its own excess. Pastor after pastor has been exposed for the very behaviors that Jesus warned me about during my experience. Each news story feels like validation of what I was shown. The divine assignment I received wasn't just about my personal spiritual journey. It was about a larger movement of truth that God is orchestrating across the religious landscape. The timing isn't coincidental. This is divine justice unfolding in real time. My return to life came with a clear mission: to help God's people develop the spiritual discernment they need to recognize authentic faith from its counterfeit. The Trinity Foundation's 30 years of documentation suddenly made perfect sense to me. They had been doing God's work, shining light into dark places where money had corrupted the message of salvation. But the exposure of corruption isn't the end goal, it's the beginning of restoration. Jesus showed me that there are authentic spiritual leaders out there, people who truly understand that ministry is about service, not profit. These are the voices that need to be amplified as the false prophets are revealed for who they really are. Now, you might be wondering, this is an incredible story. But how does this help me in my own spiritual journey? I'm glad you asked. So how do you develop this kind of spiritual discernment in your own life? Based on what Jesus showed me and what I've learned since returning, here are the key principles you need to know. Now here's what Jesus specifically told me to share with you. These 4 warning signs that could save your family from financial manipulation. First, look at how religious leaders handle money. Jesus lived simply and gave freely. Any leader whose lifestyle dramatically exceeds that of their followers should be questioned. Authentic spiritual authority doesn't require luxury to be effective. Stop for a moment and think about your own spiritual leaders. I want you to honestly ask yourself, do they live more simply than you do or more lavishly? If you're uncomfortable answering that question, that discomfort itself might be the Holy Spirit trying to tell you something important. Second, pay attention to the message being preached about money and blessing. If you're being told that your spiritual standing depends on your financial contributions, that's not the gospel Jesus taught. Divine love doesn't come with a price tag, and God's blessing isn't for sale. Third, examine the transparency of the organizations you support. If financial information is hidden, complicated, or justified with spiritual language that makes questioning seem like lack of faith, that's a red flag. True servants of God have nothing to hide and everything to gain from transparency. Fourth, trust the peace that comes from authentic spiritual encounters versus the pressure that comes from manipulation. Jesus never pressured anyone to give. His love was unconditional, and his teachings were clear and simple. If you're feeling manipulated, pressured, or confused by spiritual teaching, step back and pray for discernment. But remember, these aren't just guidelines I'm sharing. They're the exact spiritual weapons Jesus gave me to protect his people. And here's how this knowledge completely transformed my own life. These 4 signs aren't just guidelines. They're the spiritual weapons Jesus gave me during my near-death experience to protect his people from wolves in sheep's clothing. Every time you apply these discernment tools, you're participating in the divine justice movement that's cleaning house in the church today. The experience of meeting Jesus during my near-death experience has completely transformed how I approach both my professional work and my spiritual life. I no longer see financial stewardship and spiritual integrity as separate issues. They are intimately connected, and how we handle money reveals everything about our true spiritual condition. I've become much more intentional about supporting ministries that demonstrate real transparency and authentic service to their communities. I look for organizations that spend the majority of their resources on actual ministry rather than administrative overhead or leader compensation. I've learned to ask hard questions and expect clear answers. Most importantly, I've learned that divine truth always emerges no matter how carefully it's hidden. These scandals we're seeing now are just the beginning. Jesus is cleaning house, and those who have been using his name for personal gain will continue to be exposed. But this spiritual discernment Jesus gave me isn't just about evaluating religious organizations. The same principles that help us recognize authentic spiritual authority can transform how we approach truth in every area of our lives. When we learn to recognize authentic spirituality versus its counterfeit, we become better at recognizing authenticity in general. But here's what I've realized since my return. This divine assignment isn't meant to be carried alone. The corruption Jesus showed me affects millions of believers, and we need each other to expose it. Share your story below. Have you seen your pastor living in luxury while asking you to sacrifice more? Have you felt that sick feeling in your stomach when the offering plate comes around, knowing where your money really goes? Your testimony isn't just a comment, it's part of God's plan to expose these wolves. When you speak up, you give others permission to trust what they've been feeling. Together, we're not just building a community, we're fulfilling Jesus' mission to clean his Father's house. You came here wondering about divine justice in mega churches, and now you have the proof. Jesus himself showed me the 3 financial schemes destroying faith: the shell company shuffle that steals donations, the family payroll scam that enriches pastors' relatives, and the luxury lifestyle trap that turns shepherds into wolves. The divine assignment I received isn't just my story, it's your wake-up call. These 4 discernment tools I shared aren't just guidelines, they're the spiritual weapons Jesus gave me to protect his people from financial exploitation. You now have everything you need to recognize authentic ministry from its counterfeit. Don't let another believer fall victim to financial manipulation. Subscribe now, because next week I'm revealing the actual bank documents that prove how Gateway Church moved $50 million through shell companies. Documents they tried to hide, but divine justice exposed. Ring that bell, because when these financial predators target your church next, you'll have the evidence to protect your community. This spiritual awakening is spreading faster than they can cover their tracks. Remember, divine love is free, divine truth is accessible to everyone, and authentic spiritual authority serves rather than dominates. These are the standards by which all religious teaching and leadership should be measured. These are the truths that Jesus burned into my heart during those eternal moments in His presence. Your spiritual journey matters too much to trust it to anyone who has forgotten these fundamental truths. Choose your spiritual influences carefully, support authentic ministry generously, and never stop asking God for the discernment you need to navigate these complex times. The divine justice we're witnessing is just the beginning of a much larger spiritual awakening that's coming to transform how we understand faith, community, and the true nature of God's unconditional love.